Hello everyone, Amtrak Guy 365 here. Today on Engines of Amtrak, I'm here to talk about the toasters, or EMD AEM-7, whatever you like more. Amtrak needed a new locomotive, so they went to Sweden, bought a meatball, went to France, bought a french fry. Amtrak liked the meatball more than made toasters based on that meatball. That's it, hope you enjoyed, bye. That's the simplified version of what actually happened. Anyway, in 1976, Amtrak's General Electric built E60 locomotives were becoming rather problematic. The six-axle truck design and heavy locomotive weight made the converted freight units unsuitable for speeds excess of 90 miles an hour. Amtrak sent several E60s into the shops for an upgrade in speed from 90 to 110 miles an hour as a result. During the E60 leave, Amtrak needed a replacement high-speed locomotive and looked to the more successful European locomotive market for a high-speed design. The first choice was the SJ Class RC locomotive from Sweden. The RC was a series of mixed traffic engines first built in 1967 by ASEA. The RC series was designed to replace aging 1950s and 40s electric locomotives on the Swedish railway network. 130 RC4s were built and was the most built out of the series. The RC variant rode on a B-B wheel arrangement, was rated for a top speed of 84 miles an hour, measured 50 feet and 1/4 inch in length, and weighed in at 156,000 pounds. The RC4 thus became the first chosen test subject for Amtrak. RC4 number 1166 arrived in the United States in late 1976 and soon became numbered X995 during its stay. The RC4 ran several tests along the Northeast Corridor, and the locomotive's overall performance and lightweight impressed Amtrak. During tests, a nickname was developed for the locomotive called Swedish Meatball. Moving into 1977, Amtrak decided to test another European electric locomotive known as the SNCF Class CC6500. The 6500 was an express passenger engine built by MTE from 1969 to 1974 and had been given the nickname Broken Nose. The 6500 rode on a CC wheel arrangement rated for a top speed of 124 miles an hour, was 66 feet and 3 inches in length, and weighed in at 306,443 pounds. The locomotive Amtrak borrowed was SNCF CC21003. The locomotive left Le Havre, France on January 5, 1977 and arrived in New York on January 10th. The locomotive was painted into Amtrak colors, and required American changes were made by Alstom at the Wilmington, Delaware shops between February 21st and March 7th. Changes included were transformer and electrical components modified to match Amtrak's 25 Hz traction power system, an implemented Amtrak cab signaling system, American Buckeye-style couplers, locomotive bell, and a new weight of 357,149 pounds. There was also a few other changes required by the AAR for operation on the Amtrak railroad system. The locomotive was then numbered X996. French test personnel quickly criticized the subpar American trackage before the locomotive even turned a wheel. They continuously reminded Amtrak railroad staff of this fact throughout test runs. The locomotive ran test trains between Washington, D.C. and New York and New Haven. As the test runs went on, it was soon determined the French locomotive suspension system was not suited for the American Northeast Corridor trackage. The track at the time was rather rough and considered substandard by the French. Each 3-axle truck on the locomotive contained a quill drive system. The drive shaft was threaded through the axle as it pushed on the wheel to take in the track bumps. The design was common in France, and the X996 design used stiff suspension springs, too stiff for subpar American trackage. Thus, the locomotive bounced roughly up and down the Northeast Corridor. No adjustments were made to the suspension to provide good performance. Through April 7th to the 15th, the equipment was sent away back to France, and X996 returned to service as SNCF CC21003, and later CC6577. Concluding tests, Amtrak favored the RC4 and decided to base their new passenger locomotive on it. 5 companies bid on the locomotive contract. However, a license was arranged, and Amtrak commissioned EMD in partnership with ASEA in January 1978 to build a new locomotive that would soon become the AEM-7. The A stood for ASEA, the Swedish company who helped produce the AEM-7, EM stood for electromotive, and the 7 stood for 7,000 horsepower. Amtrak's initial order in September 1977 called for 53 locomotives at a cost of $137.5 million. However, limited funding reduced the order to 30 locomotives costing $77.8 million. The first batch arrived in late 1977. The dual-cab locomotive car bodies were built by the Budd Company, but all internal components were designed and built by the Swedish ASEA. Amtrak's AEM-7 weighed in at 202,000 pounds, measured in at 51 feet 1 inch long by 10 feet and 2 inches wide, and it stood 14 feet and 9.5 inches tall. The top speed of the AEM-7 was 125 miles an hour and produced 7,000 horsepower with 51,710 pounds of tractive effort. Two Faiveley DS-11 two-stage pantographs were used to draw in electricity from the 3 different voltage systems on the Northeast Corridor. The locomotives also came equipped with a 670 horsepower head-end power system to electrify and heat between 8 and 10 Amfleet cars. The units came equipped with Nathan K5LA air horns. Here's a few samples. In February 1980, Amtrak ordered 17 more AEM-7s, bringing the total to 47. AEM-7 revenue service began on May 9th of 1980 as number 901 departed Washington Union Station with a Metroliner service. Railfans soon picked up on the Swedish influence engine's pre-existing nickname, Swedish Meatball, and soon nicknamed them Toaster due to their compact and boxy design. The locomotive had some of the highest electrical locomotive technology of the time, including thyristor motor control to change electrical voltage pickup and traction motor that provided maximum power without wheel slip. The locomotive's lightweight also made them much more stable on NEC rails and could easily manage 100 miles an hour or more. The units ultimately replaced the 1930s GG1s on May 1st of 1981. Amtrak's E60s would, in later years, be sold off to other operators, donated, or ultimately be scrapped. The Car and Locomotive Cyclopedia later stated that no new locomotive since the New York Central Hudson had such an impact on speeds and schedule performance. Amtrak would later use the AEM-7s on the Keystone service, replacing Metroliner train sets, as well as the Clocker, Northeast Regional, mail trains, and various other commuter services. The Maryland Area Regional Commuter Rail Service ordered their own 7 AEM-7s in 1986. The Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority ordered 7 units in 1987. Consistent, reliable service led Amtrak to buy 7 more locomotives in 1987, bringing the fleet up to 54, having been delivered in 1988. Prior to this, however, a tragic wreck occurred on the Northeast Corridor at 1:30 p.m. on January 4th, 1987. Amtrak train number 94, the Colonial, with AEM-7 900 and 903 leading, smashed into 3-stop Conrail locomotives at Gunpowder interlocking between 120 and 125 miles an hour. The Conrail locomotives had passed a red signal, leading to the deaths of 14 passengers, the Amtrak engineer, and lead lounge car attendant. Number 900 and 903 were completely destroyed. Until the wreck at Big Bayou Canot in Alabama in 1993, it was the worst wreck in Amtrak history. Despite the devastating crash, the AEM-7s continued their reliable service for the rest of the 1980s. In 1989, Swedish company ASEA built the ABB ALP-44 for New Jersey Transit and SAPTA. The ALP-44 may look like an AEM-7, but in reality they were separately based on the Swedish SJRC-6. 10 years later, in 1999, Amtrak, in partnership with the French company Alstom, began remanufacturing 29 AEM-7s into AC power. These were designated AEM-7AC. Alstom built the HHP-8 to compensate for those AEM-7s put out of service for rebuilds. Those units also allowed Amtrak to finally retire the E60s in 2003. In 2010, the Toaster units celebrated 30 years of service on Amtrak, but railroad operators of the locomotives had begun to draw up plans to replace them. That same year, Amtrak ordered 70 Siemens ACS-64s to replace the AEM-7s and HHP-8s. Upon hearing this news, many railfans from all around began flocking to the Northeast Corridor to catch their last glimpses of their favorite electrics. The first ACS-64 was put into service in February of 2014, but the AEM-7s pressed on in service up until their retirement on Amtrak on June 18, 2016. On that day, Amtrak AEM-7 942 led along with 946, a special excursion train from Washington Union Station to Philadelphia and back again. There were plenty of photo opportunities and an included tour of the Amtrak Wilmington shops where the toasters were built and maintained. MARC retired their units in April 2017, but SEPTA has yet to retire their units. However, they are expected to be replaced sometime this year in 2018. In July 2017, Amtrak number 928 and 942 were moved to the Transportation Technology Center in Pueblo, Colorado. 2 AEM-7s were ultimately preserved, being 915 and 945. In the summer of 2015, 915 went to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, and 945 was, in March of 2018, acquired by the Illinois Railway Museum. As a whole, Amtrak's fleet of AEM-7s accumulated over 220 million miles on the rails. Just as the Pennsylvania Railroad's GG1s introduced the era of electrical locomotive power for the Northeast Corridor, the AEM-7 introduced a redefined era for Amtrak, a promising era for the Northeast Corridor. The AEM-7 revived and provided reliable service for millions of people and ultimately became a fan-favorite locomotive of many rail fans. It will always be a part of the history book of Amtrak, the National Railroad Passenger Corporation. Thanks for watching. Thank you to all of the following people and sources for providing information, photos, and video for the production of this episode. I will be progressing further into the history of Amtrak's motive power next time when I discuss the General Electric P32-8 BWH. Stay tuned, and thank you again for watching.